reality
therapist
what's been going
perception.
on. Bachelorette.
Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero and I'm a licensed therapist.
I'm Chris. I'm not a licensed therapist, but apparently there's still more to talk about regarding these shows. And so here I am, still talking about them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. And what Chris is referring to is the aftermath of Bachelor in Paradise, that there have been the three couples that came out of Bachelor in Paradise have all broken up and
made it 4 whole days.
And so we are back to talk about that. And we'll get into how we're going to do that. But before we do, please be sure to hit that like button at the bottom of this video. And also please subscribe to our YouTube channel. These two small things go such a long way, and we really, really appreciate when you do.
Yeah. And also please hit that bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So first things first, we just want to make everyone aware, we are not becoming a Bachelor Nation news network. There are plenty of other podcasts and YouTube channels out there that do a fantastic job of that. What we really care about is when a piece of news comes out that we think we can take an interesting perspective on it with respect to relationships, communication, or overall wellness. We want to take those and we want to talk about them. And so ultimately, all three of our couples broke up within 4 days of the airing of the finale. It was, in fact, actually closer to 5 months from from when the filming ended. Yep. And so we just want to ask some questions about how inevitable this was, how predictable certain events were, and what works, kind of the red flags. We're not going to get into specifically too much rumor mongering about why they broke up or anything in that vein. What we really just care about are, what did we see on the show and that led us to this point, and what can we kind of glean from it in our own relationships or in our own relationships.
Yeah, right. And just to restate a lot of what Chris said, I do want to respect all of the couples healing. It feels icky to me to think about trying to speculate what happened and why. And so, like all of our Reactivity TV podcasts, the same disclaimer that I say then remains true now, that we're really only commenting on what we see on TV, which is a highly edited and produced franchise. And we like to use what we see on TV as a conversation starter, as a jumping off point for, just as Chris said, for us to think more about, learn more about relationships, dating, and just well-being overall.
Yeah. And so we are going to do 3 short episodes, one on each couple. They'll all be independent, and we're going to start, we're going to do them in the order of when we got the news that they broke up. And that means we're starting with Aven and Kylie.
Mm-hmm.
Aven and Kylie were the couple that left the beach together, but they were the couple that did not get engaged. In my view, this is actually one of the more surprising ones. I didn't think that, the other 2 couples were actually going to make it. But this was one that, because there wasn't necessarily the pressure of the engagement, and they did come to the beach with the priors of wanting to be together specifically, and they locked into each other very quickly and just sort of coasted along for the 5 weeks on the beach. It did feel like maybe they would have more legs than they actually had. But that was not the case. This is not speculation or rumor mongering in any way, shape, or form. It was confirmed by Aven himself, but Kylie had claimed that Aven had cheated on her, and he did admit to it. So we know that is ultimately the reason. We don't know the details. We don't know how many, when, who, any of that, nor do we necessarily care. We'll touch on it a little bit at the end, in the infidelity aspect, but that's not really going to be the main focus of where we're talking about. What we care about more is about what we saw in the relationship that led to the point prior to the infidelity. So we're going to ask the same 3 questions in each of these episodes of each of the couples. And that's going to be, was it inevitable? Was it predictable? And what were the signs that we could have, been flags for us initially to know that this outcome was going to be coming? All right. So what is the difference between inevitability and predictability for the purposes of this discussion, right? Predictability, we're really talking about, given what we saw on the screen and what we know of the characters, was this the most likely outcome to happen? Versus inevitability, meaning that we truly believe that there was no other real alternative. Now, what I will say is predictability oftentimes is benefited from hindsight, right? Whereas inevitability is not really benefited from hindsight, right? Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So let's start with inevitability. Do you think that their breakup was inevitable?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Now, why do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I was pretty clear in our finale episode of Bachelor in Paradise that I was really cautious about them moving forward in this relationship. It felt like they were not on the same page. They had very different values as it related to engagement and marriage. And they were also on very different pages around the future of their relationship. It seemed that they struggled to communicate. It seemed that they struggled to navigate through conflict. And so we're talking about some pretty significant things as it relates to just what creates a good foundation for a relationship. We've talked about that throughout the last 10, 12 weeks of doing this podcast. So all of those things for me summed up to a breakup was inevitable. And let alone them, the way that they left together in how miserable Kylie looked and her viewing this as a sacrifice to leave without getting what she wanted. None of that sets a couple up for success. And that was one thing that I had talked about in the finale episode is that they are like in for an uphill battle, even specifically because of the way that they were leaving as adversaries rather than as partners. And so for me, this was highly inevitable and spoiler alert, highly predictable.
Interesting. So I was going to say no, not inevitable. And the reason I say that is because, ultimately we are the catalyst for their breakup was infidelity. And we are in control of our actions, right? Aven made choices that directly led to the demise of the relationship, and he did not have to make those choices. And thus, I don't think it's inevitable. Now, I do think that it was predictable for a lot of the reasons that you already stated. And I do think that they likely probably would have broken up for some other reason, many of the reasons that you stated. But the thing about this couple in particular was that they came to the beach, locked on each other. They were both clearly very attracted to one another. And they both, I think, genuinely did want to be together. Now, whether or not they're mature enough to really understand what that means and what that entails is a different conversation. But I do think that, had Aven made different, more mature choices, they probably could have lasted quite a long time.
Different, more mature choices post beach,
meaning not putting things inside other women.
Well, we don't know if that's.
We do not know what he actually did. I'm speculating. I'm sorry, but yes, not doing something inappropriate with another party.
You think that they had the maturity and the relationship had enough legs to actually navigate through all the things that I just stated were issues? I
think
they also weren't living in the same city.
Well, okay, so this is good. So based on what I saw, do I think that Kylee, being Kylee, could have beaten Aven down over the span of 12 to 18 months to the point where he decides it's just easier to get engaged than not and marry her, and then we'll be married? Whether or not it's a happy marriage or not is not necessarily the question. The question is, do they break up is really the question. I think that is on the board. I thought that was certainly on. That was closer to probable than not probable if Aven doesn't commit adultery, right? I mean, I think again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's going to be a healthy, happy marriage. I don't think they would have had a happy, healthy marriage, but I do think that they could have made it, and thus why I don't think it was inevitable.
Interesting. So the thing for me, I said it was predictable. The thing that surprised me the most was how quickly they broke up. I mean, relatively quickly. I mean, it was 5 months. I really did think that they would stay together, likely in an unhappy and unhealthy relationship dynamic, simply for the social media clout, to be one of the many Bachelor Nation couples that, shills SponCon on Instagram and just kind of ride that out into the sunset until, that well dries up and then they break up. That was my prediction of what their, relationship would have been, is just like the relationship is the vehicle to us gaining more popularity and money. That it didn't. And so I'm surprised that's a surprising part. We didn't just get more of that. And had Aven not stepped out of their relationship, it probably would not have ended so soon along with the other couples. But I think an ending was inevitable
Interesting. Yeah.
and predictable.
Okay. So what you're saying is maybe I should put a time limit on the inevitability.
Yeah.
Like within 3 years, 5 years, like if we ride out our marriage for 15 years and then call it an end, does that count as inevitable or successful, or at what point? Yeah, I got you. Okay. All right. Well, let's just talk briefly then about signs, flags. What do you think was some of the most meaningful flags that somebody could have identified in this situation?
I think there were a lot. I think the way that they navigated through those final days and having that conversation around engagement told me a lot. And it told me a lot about how clear and upfront Kylie and Aven both were about what they were hoping to get out of this experience on the beach and their relationship. And what we know from all of the shows in the Bachelor franchise is that they do operate on an accelerated timeline, right? Like on the regular seasons of Bachelor, Bachelorette, they have like 8-ish weeks before an engagement, and BIP, it's somewhere between 3 and 5. And so what that means then is that you have to also, your conversations about what you want and need in a relationship need to match that that cadence, that time frame. And so we have this experience where Kylie knew coming into this that she was ready for and wanting an engagement out of this. And if that was something that was very important to her, I would have loved to have seen her say that up front, for her to then be met with Aven saying up front, okay, well, I think that's absurd. I cannot wrap my brain around that. I would regret for the rest of my life getting engaged on the show and it not working out. Then they could have had the opportunity, a longer runway to work through this conversation rather than like literally being under the gun to do it. Or they could have decided, okay, we want different things, we're out. And so I guess long-winded way of saying one big red flag was them not being clear and upfront about their expectations of one another from the beginning, coupled by poor communication, and finally by awful conflict resolution skills. I think that those 3 things were blaring red flags, big ones.
Yeah, the conflict resolution was the one that really struck out at me. We talk a lot about communication styles and, the ability to communicate what you want. And, you've done plenty of podcasts talking about active listening and stuff like that, where, hearing what your partner is actually saying and internalizing it and figuring, how to support them in their needs. But you can do both of those pieces. But at the end of the day, if you don't actually know how to resolve or bridge gaps, or and the characters that these 2 individuals are playing on the show tend to come across as a little bit of entitled and bratty, and not necessarily willing to sacrifice, or in the case of Kylie, think that she's over-sacrificing when she's really not. That's a big bridge to gap, and I think a big red flag for me, more so than some of the others.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, and I guess that brings me to like one of the like also bigger red flags that again I alluded to earlier regarding the inevitability and predictability of their breakup, is that they had such difficulty navigating through this conflict to the point where they became adversarial. And what I had said in the finale episode of Bachelor in Paradise was, what I had wished is that rather than be adversaries, me versus you, what I want versus what you want, I wish that they had come together as partners against a problem. So becoming teammates against this issue that we have. And whether the issue is, I don't even know that they would necessarily agree on what the problem was, but maybe the problem was what the next step in our relationship is, and that we have a different way of viewing what the next step in our relationship is. If they had an understanding of how to define the collective problem and viewed that as the thing that they were tackling, they probably could have come up with things that felt more like compromises and less like sacrifices as they decided how they were going to tackle that. Like, okay, Kylie, you want to get engaged. I don't feel comfortable yet. How are we going to work together to get you to feel as comfortable as you possibly can in order for you and I to feel like we're in a good place with the future of our relationship? That's a really different conversation than what we saw happen. And so their inability to do that, whether that's due to their own immaturity in years, immaturity in relationships, incompatibility, perhaps. I don't know. But that for me was the biggest red flag, them being adversaries and not partners.
So it's safe to say that from our perspective, two big problems: one, lack of a shared vision; two, lack of good communication skills.
Yes.
That's ultimately where we can leave it with the two of them.
Yep.
Cool.
I just want to take a quick pause to tell you that Revive is hiring. In our Miami and Pittsburgh offices, we have full and part-time W-2 and 1099 clinician positions available, and this includes both postgraduate and associate level licenses, in addition to fully licensed clinicians. In our Connecticut offices, we have full-time, fully licensed W-2 clinician positions available, including clinical supervisor opportunities. If you are interested in working for a company that values community, work-life balance, and your personal and professional growth, then we want to meet you. Find a link to our website in our bio.
Okay. I want to touch on the infidelity stuff for 30 seconds.
Sure.
Yeah. My quick opinion here is, kind of staying within the same form. Was it inevitable? Here's the reality of the situation. You always control your own actions. But was it sort of predictable? Aven is an extremely hot guy, who went on a TV show that you probably don't go on unless you're looking for influence and clout and name recognition. And he's now in the spotlight with probably tens of thousands of women who are throwing themselves at him. I can see how it becomes a crime of opportunity. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make it okay, but obviously we just know from years upon years upon years of observation that this just seems to happen with pro sports players, with singers, with athletes, whatever. And so inevitable, no. Predictable, yes, is how I would say that. Right? You're always ultimately responsible for your own decisions. But what I think is more interesting is, what does it say about his actual relationship with Kylee, right? I say it all the time. Love is not a feeling. It's the actions that we take. And if you're out there committing adultery in whatever its form, then you can't on one hand love somebody and at the same time cheat on them. If you make the argument that love is a feeling, then sure, you absolutely can make that argument that you can both cheat and love. But if you hold to my belief on what love is, that it is actions, then that is not possible. And thus it tells me that Aven does not, nor has he probably ever actually loved Kylee. And it also tells us that he probably does not have a lot of respect for Kylee or people in general, because it takes a lot to betray that level of trust. Even if you don't love the person, you are still committing a pretty heinous and atrocious act of breach of trust.
Okay, so you said a lot there, and I guess my question for you is: do you think a couple can overcome infidelity?
And I
also want to stress the fact that Chris is not a therapist, so in his answer for this, but go ahead.
I'm not. Okay, so it's in some ways. This is a question that comes up a lot, mm-hmm. And you and I have had this conversation many times over the years. And I do the thing you're not supposed to do, and that's answer a question with a question or point out that I think the question's bad. I do think the question's bad. I think the right question is, why would you want to? Because at the end of the day, once that trust is gone, you are literally going to have to spend, you will quite possibly probably never get that trust back. Why would you want to go through that effort and that energy? And the answer is because you really love somebody and it was a mistake. And if you truly feel that way, then yes, you could spend the rest of your life trying. Will you ever overcome it? I think it takes a very, very special person to forgive somebody, wholly forgive him, and never look back from it. I also think that it takes a very special kind of person to engage in that behavior and also then be able to actually feel remorse and make amends for it. So is it possible? Well, sure, in the sense of it's possible to win the lottery. Is it likely? No. In practically speaking, it's probably time to end it, and just go on a soul search, figure out, how to become a better person and rebuild somewhere else, right? I think it's very, very, very hard to build a house on top of rubble. You have to clear the rubble away first.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna sort of reserve a lot of my opinion and just not only my opinion, my clinical insight, and just if you do want to hear actually 3 therapists talk about infidelity and couples facing infidelity, then I'm going to make sure to drop our Wishing You Well podcast on infidelity in the show notes. It was a great episode with one of our colleagues who is a couples therapist and works with a lot of couples who are navigating through infidelity. So it's a really, really great episode. Go check it out.
Did I just lose her a bunch of clients?
No. But I don't think your opinion or your view on infidelity is necessarily unique. And I do think that you are correct in that it takes a lot of work and on both sides in order for a couple to kind of navigate through it and end up on the other side in a healthy way. You said something just now about building a house on rocky foundation. And here's where, again, if we're talking about, let's compare hypotheticals here, right? Like if we're thinking about Gary and Tony, right? They were in a relationship for 40 some odd years. They built a life and a family together. They have a solid foundation. If later in their relationship, and I'm just completely making this up just for the point of comparison here, if at some point during their marriage together, what Tony had stepped out on the relationship, there's a higher likelihood that Gary and Tony could navigate through that and because they had such a strong foundation already, right? Whereas Kylee and Aven, what do they have? I think it's been 5 months since filming wrapped. And they haven't necessarily been able to live like a couple in those 5 months. So they don't even have a foundation yet. Barely, maybe the first layer of bricks built. And so there's not a lot of there to build on top of. It's already shaky. And then add an infidelity, it makes it that much more challenging to kind of get your relationship through that because it's already on rocky ground. And so I think that piece of it is important to note there is that they didn't really have a strong foundation to begin with, which, of course, the house that they were building is demolished as a result of the infidelity. Do I think the infidelity was inevitable? No, it doesn't surprise me, I guess, is what I'll say.
So predictable,
not necessarily inevitable. I mean, he is revered. He is an attractive guy. I'm sure, as you said, he's getting a lot of attention. We know that he slid into Kylie's DM, so he's not shy for a DM slide, not to say like once a DM slider, always a DM slider, but he fucks around on Instagram. So, who knows? Like that's likely where a crime of opportunity could have happened. But listen, they were not on solid ground. And I don't know what their relationship was like leading up to the infidelity. I don't know how frequent it happened. Kylie indicated that it was multiple instances. But yeah, I'm not necessarily inevitable, but again, highly predictable.
Yep. So there's a couple of things you touched on, and it reminded me of there's a sports, talking head that I listened to some of his material, and he uses this analogy a lot with respect to dirty players, right? So like if a player does it, some sort of dirty hit or something like that, a lot of it is about well, how many opportunities did they have to have a dirty hit versus how many did they actually, implement? And he uses the analogy like if you've had, say, a housekeeper for 10 years. And then, one day some money goes missing. And it's like, wow, 10 years, something must have really, really happened in her life to have caused her to do that. I can be a little sympathetic. I might still fire her at the end of the day, but like there's some sympathy there. And there's at least a question of like, wow, what must have happened? But if I've had a housekeeper for a month and money goes missing, that's a completely different situation. They both commit the same, act the same crime exactly one time. But the fact that you've had 10 years with that housekeeper to know, kind of what quality person she's been gives you a little bit more of an indication of maybe this was just a one-off, something going on type situation. And that's exactly kind of your point that you're making with, using the hypothetical Gary situation and Tony. Like, if you've got 40 years together and something happens, like, okay, you've demonstrated who you are for 40 years. And so, yes, there's a greater probability that you could overcome that. I would counter a little bit by saying also, it feels like the stab wound in the back goes deeper, because after all this time, also, how could you do this to me after all this time? Like, what have I not done for you for the last, X number of years? And has this been something that's been building? And I feel like that cut is just a lot deeper at the same time. But you do have a more grounded foundation. You have family. You've got, your entire lives are entwined together. And so there's more motivation for you two. As one other thing you touched on, and you said it's work for both parties. And I also acknowledge that this is both true and also in many cases unfair. Now, if you are the person who has been cheated on, that does not necessarily absolve you from all sins of a relationship. You could have done things and have made things in the relationship difficult. That doesn't warrant somebody, cheating, but it does mean that potentially there's work that you could do to make the other person feel better about themselves. At the same time, they have work to do to figure out why they decided to commit a pretty heinous act of disloyalty.
Well, forgiveness is work.
Yeah. Well, but the point that really I want to get to is that it's not actually fair, because at the end of the day, somebody else did something and you now have to commit work to forgive them. Even if you were not perfect in the relationship, even if there are things that you could improve upon, the reality is it's still not fair that somebody else did something and you now have to put into work to fix their mistake.
No, of course. I mean, you can imagine that a lot of resentment might grow as a result of that too. And so again, it's not easy, but if a couple is interested in, willing to work through it, then you're both signing up for the work that comes along with it.
So in your clinical expertise, when you have seen infidelity, what's the batting average? What's the hit ratio? Like, how many make it through?
It's really tough to do.
So that's a clinical obfuscated way of saying not that's a low percent.
I think my clinical answer is going to frustratingly be, it depends. Like every couple and every situation is really different. It's really hard to put an average on something like that. But what I will say is definitively it is not easy to do. It's not impossible, and it's not easy to do.
All right. I think we did a lot with them. Feel good about that. Anything else you want to talk on about Aven and Kylie?
No, I just, I wish them both well. I mean, they both probably have a lot of work to do, even though they're not together anymore. I mean, Kylie's got a lot of work to do in terms of her own healing and her, ability to trust again in a relationship. And Aven's got to figure this out in what happened and how he got himself here, so that he can dispel the myth of once a cheater, always a cheater. Like, that's not also true. And so if he wants to get into a serious long-term relationship and not cheat again, he's got to really figure out what happened here. Yeah. So wishing them luck.
Yeah. And I think they both have to work on maturity in general.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we will also be back with both an Eliza and Aaron B episode, as well as
Kat and John Henry.
There we go, that couple too. So stay tuned for that and take us out of here.
Yeah. Okay. So as Chris said, we'll be back with 2 more bonus episodes regarding post-Bachelor in Paradise relationships. So again, make sure you're subscribed so that you can get alerted when those episodes come out. You can follow along with us on Instagram at ReviveCFW. You can follow me at Amy Albero LCSW. And don't forget to check out the Wishing You Well episodes in our show notes to learn more about infidelity.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
Bye.